Yellow people talk about corruption. They will talk about this in their bedroom, they whisper it, but nobody's bold enough to come out and actually make a report and be bold enough to say, if the issue goes to court, I want to be there as a witness to see what I've heard. So sorry, I have to say this, but we all need to have some courage to talk about it, to report it, to be willing to testify against these issues in court and take it the whole length.
There's a sentiment of entitlement in terms of why we do what we do. And there's a justification behind it. There's a justification of, I am entitled to it, so I will get it at whatever cost.
In Congo, when I can see any positive effect of corruption, I can just see individual effects.
Okay.
Only those people in power, people who lead the country, can just use public resources for their own interests.
Thank you so much for bringing all your positive vibes and courage into our classroom here in Minnesota with what you're doing. It's amazing.
Corruption is the abuse of the entrusted power that we have for our own personal gains. So where we have issues like malpractices, mismanagement of public funds, we are having people bribing, we are having ghost workers, we are doing things to do with favoritism. That is how I define corruption.
Corruption is at every level, both at the public and the private level. But I always say that most importantly, everything starts from the family. What are the values we are passing on to our children? Because you cannot give what you don't have.
The confidence in the system is waning, it's decreasing, it's being chipped away. And people are finding other ways and means of getting things done.
Recording is on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. You're welcome to the Anti-Corruption Syndicate, and I'm Joseph. I'm going to be your moderator for the session. This conversation seeks to highlight the role of youth in fighting corruption in Africa. As an urban development practitioner and scholar, I'm well acquainted with informality and how the ordinary people in our cities circumvent existing structures in order to meet basic needs, right? But I'm also familiar with how institutions and governments also use the democratic advantages to steal, if you will, and also to amass wealth illegally. Ananya Roy has called this the autocracy of democracy. That is trying to describe how the people who have given power to politicians or to people who have power have used this democratic power to disenfranchise those that gave them that power. And I know there are a lot of theories and research on corruption. This conversation actually seeks to go into the practicalities, the experiences of people, and to unpack the practicalities of navigating life in a corrupted society. I'm excited to have an amazing team. These are colleagues and amazing practitioners as well. We have Damaris from Kenya, Bright from Ghana, Ariola from Nigeria, Gerard, and Daveshni. And we are going to zoom in straight into the conversation, right? So first, what we want to do is to define and situate corruption in Africa. Are we talking about the same thing? What would you define as corruption and how is it playing out in your country? And as we know how it goes, ladies first, right? So I see. I'm just going to invite Damaris to begin the conversation. So Damaris, are we talking about the same thing when we talk about corruption? How do we define corruption and how is it playing out in Kenya? Are there any positive effects to corruption? So over to you, Damaris.
Thank you so much, Jojo. I knew you would definitely choose me to start. So thank you so much. And thank you for this great session. Actually, it's an honor for me. My name is Damaris Aswa. I'm Kenyan, and I'm in Kenya. Going directly to your question, corruption is the abuse of the entrusted power that we have for our own personal gains. So where we have issues like malpractices, mismanagement of public funds, we are having people bribing, we are having ghost workers, we are doing things to do with favoritism. That is how I define corruption from my end. And I want to believe that the situation in Kenya is not that different from the other African countries. And the reason is that, basing on facts and statistics, Transparency International conducted a survey on corruption perception index, and actually Kenya ranked 124 out of the 180 countries that were actually surveyed, with an average score of 31 out of 100, which, honestly speaking, this means that corruption is seen as a significant problem in Kenya. And also we have a body in Kenya that we call a body mandated to fight corruption that is called Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission of Kenya. And they also conducted another survey. And from the survey, they also pointed out that corruption is actually the second most common problem that is facing young people in Kenya. And this comes after, of course, the unemployment rates that are very high in Kenya. So we're having a high number of young people who are not employed. So that is the first one. But the second major problem is actually corruption. And even from the survey, they actually say that Kenyans, we are losing approximately 608 billion Kenya shillings annually, which I can say is equivalent to around 6 billion USD. So you can imagine this amount of money being lost annually due to corruption. And the major sectors that were identified are health, where we're having issues to do with corruption at the health sector. We also have education and procurement. And for the education, it's because we are having ghost workers, ghost teachers in the education system. We are having people who are bribing for their children to be admitted to schools. We are also having examination malpractices that have been happening. And in the procurement, of course, when we are talking about procurement, the tendering process in Kenya, as much as we are trying to make it so transparent and accountable, we're still having gaps in the tendering process and the pre-qualification of suppliers. And in the healthcare services, this is a developing country. And you find that when patients go to hospital, especially the public healthcare facilities, you might get poor services, or maybe you might be treated and then they tell you there's no drugs at the facility, you need to buy them from outside. And the most devastating part is that some of the facilities, they even refer you to a specific pharmacy outside. And when you go there, it's quite expensive, and this is actually widening the inequalities in our society, because you find that some people cannot be able to even go and afford maybe to pay for it. We're also even scaring away, because of corruption, we are also scaring away investors, because World Bank did a research and they found out that 75% of firms reported that they had actually been asked for a bribe in order to invest in Kenya. So you see, we are trying to we are scaring away investors, which is not so good.
This is really great. I mean, you've given us a lot of information about what's happening in Kenya.
Let me just wind up. I'm not trying to scare away investors, please. For the teachers who are listening, Kenya is a beautiful country. Please come and invest. It's really, really beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Don't be scared.
Okay, so I'd like to say that, like Damaris is saying, the pictures we are painting is not, as it were, to say that Africa is a terrible place to be. And I'm sure in the States, there's corruption happening there as well. And you'd realize from our other conversations, you've actually advocated that we should have these conversations. We should term it more as integrity building conversations as opposed to anti-corruption conversations. Either way, we are talking about the same thing. So thank you so much, Damaris, for these insights. Thank you. All right, so Gerard, if you would, how would you contextualize corruption in Congo? And would you say there are any positive effects and positive outcomes of corruption, reflecting from Congo's perspective?
Okay, thank you, Joe. Okay, talking about corruption in Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, I can see first three things. I can see justice, I can see economics, I can see also politics. Those are the sectors that are mostly affected by corruption in my country. And without leaving also public procurement sector, because in the public procurement sector, you can see the government using the resources without any control, without the public willing. So there is, you can see distortion and misuse of those resources. And this is a big challenge because it leads to poverty for the population. And in Congo, when I can see any positive effect of corruption, I can just see individual effects.
Okay.
Only those people in power, people who lead the country, can just use public resources for their own interests. And this cannot lead to any global or general interest in the community or in the country. And this is really what I can say about corruption in the country. You can see, for instance, all underrepresented population or underrepresented group, marginalized group, I mean women, girls, people living with disabilities, and all other underrepresented social groups are really affected at a very high level by corruption in my country. And what I do personally in every organization I work with, we are trying to create coalitions in order to fight against that cancer of corruption in my country. It means that we work in collaborations with the government, even though the government is not willing to be open to provide information about how they use national resources. We are trying to force them to accept this because we know when corruption exists in a country, it's a cancer that really affects even the government officials in another way, okay? For instance, there can be some money which are allocated to build infrastructures in the country, but when that money is misused, you can see even government officials themselves will have problems to move on the bad roads. Okay.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you.
Yes. So thank you very much for highlighting the experience in Congo. So like you're saying, if we are to say that there is any advantage to corruption, it's at the individual level, and it doesn't benefit the society and the community as a whole. All right. So I'm going to come to Ariola. Ariola, what would you say is the role of individuals and institutions in corruption? How are we playing? How are we contributing to this whole thing? Individuals and institutions. And do you have any experiences to share as to, maybe you could share some of your experiences, how your role, like what the work you're doing is trying to expose and to reduce corruption in Nigeria?
Okay, good day, everyone. Once again, good to have you. So for me personally, I would say that corruption is at every level, both at the public and the private level. But I always say that most importantly, everything starts from the family. What are the values we are passing on to our children? Because you cannot give what you don't have. So on an individual level, for instance, if I'm going on the road and I see something wrong, I call it out. So I give you an example. There was a day I was in the public transport. I paid my fare. The conductor didn't give me back my change. Of course, I knew I was going through that route. I didn't go the following day. This third day when I passed, I accosted him because it was the same bus. And I said, "You're owing me some change." And immediately he first denied. Luckily, I had an encounter with the driver. So I approached the driver and I explained myself to the driver. This is the situation. This person is owing me so amount. So I'm going to pay just the balance to pay for my fare that day. But because he knew me, I'd interfaced with him. He knew me. He took my word and he believed me. And he collected that difference. That's on an individual level. Now, on a broader perspective, I'd entered a public bus owned by Lagos State. They call them BRT. And at some point, we were at the terminal. There were a lot of people there. The buses were there in the parking lot, but the drivers were refusing to go. What did I do? I called somebody who I knew and asked him to please give me one of the managers there, his contacts, and I picked up my phone, called the person, laid my complaint, and guess what? Immediately they swung into action and they made a bus available, which was able to convey all the passengers. So I would say that's at the institutional level. I didn't have to know that person one-on-one. I knew somebody who knew somebody, and they just gave me the contact and I called. Another instance, when I'm going and I see maybe a bad road or anything, I take short videos. There's the Lagos State Public Works. I send the videos to them, tell them this is the location of what I've seen. And guess what? It takes a while, but eventually they come around and they fix it. Now, like we all know, there's corruption everywhere across Africa, globally. But I also believe that there are institutions who are responsible for certain things, both at the public and the private level. And I believe that as long as we have access to these institutions, it is our own civic responsibilities as citizens to reach out to people that we believe are responsible to please take necessary action and address these situations. So, and I think that's what we all owe ourselves as a society, that we should be able to point out whoever is responsible, and we should be accountable to one another. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ariola. So, I like the way you summarized it at the end. It's about taking necessary action and holding people to account. Thank you very much. Bright, from your experience, do you feel that corruption is chipping away public confidence and trust in government and the general desire of people to participate and contribute to good governance and nation building? And also, as you share these, I'd like to inform our participants that there will be a section for engagement. So if you have any questions, you could note them down. I'll invite Deborah, and then they will let us have your responses or your comments and engagement. We always love to engage with participants. So if that's okay. Bright, if you're there.
Good afternoon to everybody once again. You already have our profile, so there's no need to introduce myself, I suppose. To the question you asked, Dennis, there was an article in the Washington Post in 2021 by Kilder and Mattis. The title of the article is, "Why are Africans dissatisfied with democracy?" That was a question. So why are Africans dissatisfied with democracy? And then the title continues, "Think corruption." So basically the title is, "Why are Africans dissatisfied with democracy? Think corruption." And that should tell you everything you need to know about the effect of corruption, on the continent. Essentially, the difference in terms of corruption here on the continent and elsewhere, you did mention that, of course, a lot of places have corruption as well. It's not just on our continent. Is that the practitioners in the field, like myself, we distinguish between what we call political or grand corruption. Basically what? Maybe a congressman and a businessman having a transaction. I'm using examples that our audience can relate to. That's different from what we call administrative corruption, what I call access corruption, where basically corruption is preventing you from access to healthcare, like Damaris explained, or access to other social services, as Arinola pointed to. And we have a lot of those on the continent, the ones that prevent people from getting access to essential services. And that's why there's so much hue and outcry on the continent of Africa when we talk about corruption. Our colleagues in the US, and there's a Ghanaian lady, I think that she's Miss Boatin. I don't know if she's been to Ghana before, but she might want to recall her experience, maybe getting a social service, like getting a passport in Ghana and getting a passport in the US. It's a pretty straightforward procedure in the US. I've been in work for the Charlottesville Council, just a short internship when I was doing my majority fellowship in the US in 2017. And I saw how things work. Everything in terms of assets, there's a straightforward procedure to it. The turnaround time is known. The amount you paid is advertised and known. And pretty much that works. Here, everything else, it seems that is even something you're entitled to. You need to go through all kinds of raspberry to assess. So that's a big distinction. Now, what that access issue has created then is that people are having, or the confidence in the system is waning, is decreasing, is being chipped away. And people are finding other ways and means of getting things done. And when that goes on for a long time, what basically happens is that, and it's already happening, people are already talking about how democracy is not good for Africa, how democracy is bad for Africa. I currently have a grant from the US State Department where I'm doing an anti-corruption project that targets student leaders. And this is what we are working on, democracy and their agents in it, just to let young people know that, look, it's just a system. It only works if all the players in the system do their job. So even for young student leaders, if they don't create spaces for people to participate, hear the voices of their constituents, and do what their constituents want, then democracy doesn't mean much. So it's not a question of democracy not delivering, it's a question of there are actors in our system, like you explained earlier, which has become a cabal, which have basically arrested the system and said, we want to make XY benefits from it for our own, parochial interests, while everybody at the expense of everybody else. And as long as that goes on and people are having access issues, they are going to not have trust in the system that we are running, which basically across the context now all not democratic systems. So it's not a question of democracy being bad. It's just that the governance system we are practicing, because of a few people, is not delivering social goods. And the answer, just as the article mentions, is corruption.
Yeah. So before you go on, just a last thing. So how are we, from your experience, and I'll be coming to you, Deveshni, I'll be coming to you. So on the work you're doing, how are you kind of trying to reduce, all this kind of corruption that you're highlighting, like fighting corruption actually? Right now, I want us to look at how we are fighting corruption in our various sectors.
It is not rocket science. It's not some, formula that you have to mix in a lab. It's not anything you really have to do. I work in Ghana. I do anti-corruption projects in Sudan, anti-corruption projects in Benin, anti-corruption projects in Sierra Leone. It's the same issues all over. One of the first things you need is a lot of education. People need to understand really what corruption is. Damaris did define it for us. Abuse of entrusted power for private gain. They need to understand the forms of corruption, because they might be engaging in things that are corruption, but they are just unaware of it. And they need to be aware of the effects of that on the entire society. And just as you pointed out in your question, the effects having on all of us. But beyond that, you need your anti-corruption institutions to be working, to be functional. Because when the political class fails you, that's your last barricade, really. And the anti-corruption institutions and the judiciary. So most of what we do is about empowering citizens to stand up, be bold, and report, like Arinola did. Be bold and report the issues. That's the first step. Yellow people talk about corruption. They will talk about this in their bedroom. They whisper it, but nobody is bold enough to come out and actually make a report and be bold enough to say, if the issue goes to court, I want to be there as a witness to see what I've heard. So I'm sorry I have to say this, but we all need to have some courage. Many years, some 50 years ago, as a continent, we had to throw off the weight of colonization. Now, our biggest challenge is our own people and true corruption. We all need to have some courage to talk about it, to report it, to be willing to testify against these issues in court and take it the whole length.
Thank you very much, Bright.
To act on it.
You can hold it there. Deveshni, thank you. Deveshni, back to you. So on the same issue, on the same question, how, South Africa, we know South Africa, like before the session started, we're just having a conversation about how these, there's still existence of racial segregation, and even you can see it in the geographical layouts of the country and the cities and all of that. How is corruption materialized in South Africa? And what are some of the ways that, from your knowledge, is being fought? How are we fighting against corruption in South Africa? Deveshni, if you are there.
Thank you so much. The one thing that I have to admit is in terms of the common types of corruption. So Damaris, defined it so nicely. And, when I was looking at the first question with regards to the definition and the situating, in order to you to define it, you need to understand why the behavior is there. And as you put it, with regards to everything that South Africa has been through in terms of our history, I think there's a sentiment of entitlement in terms of why we do what we do. And there's a justification behind it. So if you look at what South Africa's biggest types of corruption is, we have places of authority and places that supposed to uphold it are the ones that are highlighted in terms of corruption. So you look at police, you look at health sectors, you look at the mining sector, you look at the procurement sector. So these are all the sectors that have the largest amount of activities of corruption. It is because, as I said, because of our history, people have now arrived at a place in their life and in their time where they believe everything that they want and need, they're entitled to it. So however they achieve it and however they get it, there's a justification of, I am entitled to it, so I will get it at whatever cost, without realizing that the scariest reality is the cycle of corruption that happens at every level. And because you must know, because we're human beings and the reality of our behavior is based on, unfortunately, the element of greed. And that is the biggest two reasons why people perform corruptive activities. It's because of greed. Whatever little they have, it's not enough. And what they don't fail to realize is, the cycle of corruption. Although it happens at that high level, the impact and the effect is at community levels, because you're literally taking from what was meant to be for them. So, and from an addressing point of view, as I said, our biggest problem in South Africa is that address. We have whistleblowers that have been created to stop and to address corruption. But even then, you are targeted and targeted in the most scariest way, where you literally gunned down for things that you stand up for. So that's the levels that we take. And remember, because of the process of corruption, it's dealt with at police level. And that's one of the biggest areas of corruption.
So
it's not just so in black and white. It's
thank you so much, Daveshni, for you're taking us into the next section where we are looking at the risks, right? You spoke about the whistleblowers and how they've actually been targeted. About the risk factors, have we encountered any threats or any risk in this line of work that we are doing, right? Damaris, Ariola, Bright, Gerald, all of you, even Deveshni. What are some of the risks that you guys have encountered, or maybe colleagues that you know of? I know in Ghana, one investigative journalist was actually killed. In South Africa too, there are incidents of such incidents and stuff like that as well. I would like to inform our participants that if you have any questions in the next 5 or so minutes, we are going to be engaging you, so you can get ready. Deborah, in the next 5 minutes, we'll be engaging you. So yes, who'd like to go? Let me go.
I can go, Dennis.
Okay, right. So 2 minutes.
All right. So I was mentioning that in this space, the risks are all over. I've experienced it. I've experienced it personally. Instead, of course, there are a bit of trade secrets in what you do in anti-corruption. You have been my best friend for many years, and even you don't know some of the stories. I guess the most interesting one that comes to mind is when an investigative piece came out a few years ago, and I quickly gave a thumbs up to it. One of the things that happened was folks tried to ban me in my office. Basically, they light up a car tie right in front of the office, and I was locked inside. I had to call the police station that was closest to me. Thankfully, I had a few friends there to be able to come first, of course, douse the fire, and then break through the door, to be able to rescue. The anti-corruption fight, it's no joke. The people who are corrupt, the cabal that is benefiting from it, will go to any length to maintain the status quo. And that's what I mean by we all have to find some courage to be able to fight this. But the risks are real. It's at the peril of your life for those of us who are actively involved in anti-corruption. Of course, the stories, from Ghana, journalists losing their lives sometimes and all of that. So the risks are real. And everybody who is ready to do it has to be ready for that as well. But what's the alternative? Will you rather sit down and wait until the entire nation is, entirely distressed? So we all need to find some courage. And we also need to build communities and coalitions. Just as Gerard said, we are stronger together. And sometimes when we do things as a coalition, it's difficult to target a single person and come at a single person. So those are some of the approaches we use sometimes to minimize the risks that comes to us when we fight corruption.
Thank you so much, Bright. Ariola, do you have anything to share?
I don't think I've ever experienced any attack like that. But what I know that I hear stories of people being attacked in those kind of situations.
Yeah.
And like Bright said, I think coming together as a group to continuously speak up and speak out will, at least to a very large extent, help us, because we all can't keep quiet and pretend as if it's not there. It's there,
Yeah.
but there are ways to douse it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Damaris.
Yes. Yeah. So I do agree with my previous speakers. Actually, the risks are there. And I want to give a personal experience with this.
Okay.
So this is not about killings or maybe being taken through legal prosecutions or anything, but mine came in when I was implementing a certain project here. And then I won't mention the organization by then. So I was working for this organization and I was a program officer for a certain project. So it reached a point, when you're a program officer, you need to have, you need to develop a narrative report for the donors. And the narrative report has to be in line with the financial report. So because I am the program officer, by the time you were we wanted to submit the financial report and the narrative report, I actually requested the finance team to give me the financial report to go through it so that I can ascertain, because I was the one who is implementing activities and I was so sure of the amount and the budgets that I was doing. So when I went through all the documents, I had several concerns. I raised the concerns through the proper channels. Of course, you have to raise to your supervisor and all that up to the higher level. I tried raising the concerns, but shock on me, nothing was done. So I waited for the same maybe to be raised or the report to be rectified. It wasn't rectified. So it was sent to the donor. I again had to sit down with the senior now supervisor and all that, and I had to raise the same questions. So I was like, why are we doing this? The donor has sent in this funding to ensure that we create an impact in the community. But from my analysis of the financial report, it doesn't align with what I've been doing. Where is this money? There was no explanation of where that money went to. Your guess and mine is right. Someone took that money. It was pocketed by someone who didn't want to disclose. So it was not easy for me, because now they started treating me as an investigator sort of person. And most of the time they tried to avoid me, especially when they were sending financial reports. So I had to write, I'm so sorry, but I had to write to the donor and request the donor to ensure that I verify the financial report before they even receive it. So what the donor used to do is when they receive the reports, they again copy me in and try to get my inputs in the report, So it wasn't really easy for me, but there was a point that the supervisors were almost asking me to terminating my contract, but it is what it is. I had to stand for integrity. I had to stand for justice for the funders' money. Yeah, that is a personal experience.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. So, Deborah, I would like to find out if we have any participants wanting to engage, any questions, any thoughts. I'm sure there are some thoughts flying around.
I'm sure there are some thoughts. And
yes.
First of all, I want to say thank you so much for bringing all your positive vibes and courage into our classroom here in Minnesota with what you're doing. It's amazing hearing your voices and your stories. And in order to facilitate this discussion, I'm going to invite our new Assistant Director of the African Studies Initiative, Dr. Awa Sadie, to come up here and bring and sort of facilitate all the questions. So, Awa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your perspectives on this very important topic. Corruption is a huge issue globally and much more so in Africa. As you rightfully mentioned, the CPI, the Corruption Perception Index for 2022, formulated by Transparency International. I think it's kind of hopeful to see Seychelles ranked number 23 on it with a CPI of 70. And of course, what else do we expect? Lots of countries in Africa at the very bottom out of the 180 countries ranked. So it's a huge issue, and I'm not surprised that unfortunately Somalia is ranked the last on the list. And so with that, I'm going to open up to questions. Shireen, please. Yes, come ahead.
Hello, thank you guys so much for the presentation. I'll try and keep it brief. I was just reflecting as you guys were presenting on our work as educators here in the US. Sometimes when I'm teaching US history and coming from South Africa, I often think to myself that the children don't understand how lucky they are to have a system and groups of people and organizations that are to a great extent being faithful to that system. And, you know, following through, if any money is stolen, it's immediately on the news and everybody's talking about it and everybody's like on top of it. And so on the one hand, I would love to think about how we can use the experiences where democracy has kind of has not operated in its full capacity, to show the students how lucky they are to have a well-functioning democracy, whether it's the freedom to vote in elections or anything else. But at the same time, especially with sometimes the students' limited knowledge of Africa, I don't want to create a perception about South Africa or about other African countries that is the only perception they know. And so I'm often torn in between wanting to share experiences from South Africa and wanting to share, you know, the realities, but then also finding ways to share it in ways that are nuanced and that point to the many strengths that South Africa and other African countries have that America is lacking. And so I don't know if you have any ideas and thoughts on like, what can we take away as US educators to take into our classrooms when we're teaching civic education, when we're teaching about democracy in a way that draws on these experiences, but also gives Africa its legitimate strengths and features as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so who'd like to take?
Thank you, Shireen. Anyone would like to take the question, please?
Yeah,
I would like. Yeah. Okay, Bright, you can go there.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. I mean, when you ask about takeaway, you know, for your students and as educators, I'll say, and this is the word agency, people need to act. A democracy is not inherently something good. People within the system need to act to make it good. What makes it great is the fact that we're dealing with the will of the people, and the people are the ones ruling, the majority of the people. But in any institution, in any country that calls itself a democratic country, for things to work, people have to act, the institutions have to act. So when you live in the US, for example, you have to appreciate that one of the reasons that's holding your realm together is that the institutions are acting. Institutions are actually performing. And for you, for your student, it means that they also need to play their role in that particular setup. So it's all about agency. The day they stop holding people to account, the day they take steps back, the day they stop being active citizens and try to be a bit more passive, when the next generation is not as civic minded and they are not interested in communal issues, you begin to recede. The benefits of democracy also begin to wane. So the key word for me is agency. Students, teachers, officials, everybody need to appreciate that the system was only as strong as their agency, as much as they also take the active part, and they're the ones actually holding the realm together. So for me, the key word here is agency for everybody who is in that particular system. Thank you.
Thank you. Devashni, if you would also want to just chip in briefly.
Me too.
You know, the one we realize when we talk about history is we talk about it from a lot of other people's narrative of how they portrayed it. I mean, that's what the media does as well. It's what they want to tell us and let us know. So I think if you were to ever paint a picture, you know, and it's so amazing that you get to reflect when you go into another country or another place and actually have interactions with the other countries and people of those countries, is their perception of who and what experience they've had with either corruption or the country as a holistic. And I think that's important. Yes, Our country has been built in every country, I'm sure, has a lot of pain that generationally you've carried because that's what you know about your culture, etc. It's what your grandparents and your parents have told you about it. But I think the change needs to happen, as Bright said. It's how do we now perceive democracy? How do we now perceive the new narrative of story we want to say about what we've overcome and how much of work that is being done? And we are evident in that. The amazing work that we do at grassroots level with as a society organizations is that effective change we want to see. If you were to portray anything about Africa or South Africa, it would be the new story of how much positive change we all are making in it.
Thank you so much, Davishni. Well completed. It's so beautiful. Yeah, Damaris, briefly as well.
Okay, perfect. So what I wanted to say is that we all have the power to make the change that we desire. And one thing I want to say is that no matter who you are, even if you're a student, you have the ability and the power to make the change that you want. In Kenya, we are having integrity-focused initiatives that are empowering young people to come out, voice out issues, demand for accountability, and even transparency. So we are also leveraging on technological aspects. So we are coming up with innovations, mobile applications, platforms, where we are encouraging people to voice out and demand for accountability and transparency. I also want to say that I had the opportunity to be in the US, and I did my fellowship at Chicago Vote in Chicago. And one thing I noticed that the young people really want to make change, but because of lack of awareness, creation, and civic engagement, most of them, they tend to be a bit reluctant. So what I was doing when I was at Chicago Votes, we were going out and reaching out to young people to understand the issues that matter to them. And then we would translate this to voters guide. That is still going on. And then we would encourage them to come out in huge numbers and cast their vote, because that is one of the ways where they could make their voices be heard and maybe elect leaders who are leaders of integrity. So I also want to reinforce that in Kenya, we also have the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission of Kenya, which has been mandated to actually fight corruption, together coupled with the power of collaborations with other civil society organizations, the media, which is also highlighting the consequences of corruption and all these things. So I would say my final parting shot is that it requires a collaboration, and we all need to understand that it is our responsibility, and we have the power to make that desired change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Right, over to you. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Damaris. I seem to be hearing a lot on civic engagement and the power of civil society in terms of fighting corruption. And I like something that you said, Damaris, about transparency and accountability. I think these are core components of corruption that need to be tackled in order for us to be able to even see the surface of issues surrounding corruption, especially in Africa. So thank you for bringing that up. I think there are a few questions within the participant here. So anyone else? Any other questions? Yes, please. Do you mind coming up? Yeah, yes, please.
Just have a very brief comment, guys, about the power of stories. And I feel like, just as you guys all mentioning, the roots for this is always like just a common man. And I just want to see what you guys think about that. Like, what's some reflections on that, or some ideas that we can use here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So if I understand correctly, you were asking about the power of stories, how we could use stories to change the narrative. Is that right?
Is that correct? Yes, that is it.
All right. So I would take this as an artist. I'm a musician, and for my work, doing what I call the musical urbanism, using music to channel and to empower the ordinary people, to amplify the voices of the ordinary person as against the authorities that of the authority. So what I do is that I take research that has exposed how the state is being illegal, or the state is forcing people into marginalization and taking advantage of people. And I use this research and come up with music, put it in an artistic way to amplify how the youth and how others or the ordinary person can also use the same understanding to push back against the state, more like a counter-hegemonic, from a counter-hegemonic perspective. So that's what I do with my music, particularly with the musical urbanism project. And I feel in the same way with stories, story writers or even as teachers, using stories could be showing how the ordinary person, maybe videos from YouTube or pictures of how ordinary people within our communities are pushing back against corruption. You know, I think that's one of the ways that we can do it, either by coming out with a collage or inviting people to come to people to speak from their personal perspectives instead of having maybe it told. They tell their stories from their perspective. I think that would be a good way to go. Bright, I see your hand.
Yes,
Okay, wait, yeah.
Okay.
Before Bright, please, Ariola,
So
please.
for me, history is very important. I know that with Nigeria, at some point, it was as if history was taken away from our curriculum. But I see that changing now. People are clamoring more for it. So it's important, especially for those who are in the diaspora, for them to learn their history, to learn where they're actually coming from. So we have great leaders, Kwame Nkrumah. We have women leaders in the past that are Blacks, that represent a lot of positive things for Africans. So those are the kind of stories I believe should be taken into the classrooms for the children to understand values. Because like I said at the beginning, values are very important. And if you're able to put those things in the children right from when they are young, that you should have certain values, honesty, integrity, those things stay with you longer than anything, and you take it wherever you go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bright. Yeah.
Let me be brief then. Let me quickly say that in the anti-corruption space, you hear a lot of negative stories. There's no dearth of negative stories or stories of corruption. But there are also stories of people who have acted to prevent corruption, stories of people who have received corruption reports, have been able to resolve them. And we need to hear a lot of these stories as well. The reason why that is important is people need to have some confidence in the system, that sometimes reporting, following up on issues work, just as Arinola spoke about earlier. So we are actually having a project to also push up a lot more of the positive stories. And we've been talking to the anti-corruption station in Ghana, for instance, that when they have their annual reports and there are positive stories in there where they are followed up on reports, they're able to resolve issues, to better people's lives. This also needs to come to the media, same way as the negative stories come or the scandals come. So people do realize that, yes, we may be losing the war, but we are winning a few battles. And that's what some people can be inspiring enough for them to come forward and report corruption and inspire them to go to act, against corruption. We need those as well.
Thank you very much. Damaris, and then we'll come back to you. Deborah. Yeah, okay, Damaris, briefly.
Okay, so briefly, there is power in storytelling, really, there is power. And as Bright has already said, is that we have people who are really fighting corruption and they have their stories to tell. And what I just wanted to say, because all of them, there's a lot that they've spoken, is that where are these platforms for them to tell the stories? So I want to reinforce and underscore the importance of social media in telling our stories and the importance of collaborations in telling our stories. In this session, we are having teachers from United States of America, and us, we are in Africa. How about having some exchange forums where we can be able, our students can be able to tell the stories of how they are creating significant impact to other students in the United States, so that they understand from a peer level, peer-to-peer level, that, okay, students are actually taking action in Africa. So that is one recommendation that I'm saying. And you can also use blogs, podcasts, and all other avenues. But my major point was touching on the power of exchange forums and other fellowship programs that are there.
Thank you so much. Do we have more time? Yeah. Deborah.
Yes, can you? Yes.
Devashni, yes.
Yes.
No, we ran a program with a human values organization, right? And one of the things that we did was a program called I Know Your Name, but Do I Know Your Story? And it opened up an entire engagement of people connecting. And I think that's what we've lost in terms of our current day, in terms of with everything in the fourth industrial revolution. We've gone so much to technology where you would physically sit next to somebody or somebody away from you, but you'd still be so disconnected because you with your devices, etc. So I think I love what Janara said in terms of a collaborative effort and what Bright has said as well. The importance of connecting, because we're human beings, is critical. So I know your name, but do I know your story, where you've come from, the experiences you've had, to unpack it to levels where we share and we relate, and that's how we connect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Devashni. That is powerful. I think it's important for us to be able to know each other and not just as transactional, because that's how we build relationships. And so I echo what all of you said. I think we're going to have to wrap it up. Any other questions? It's a privilege to listen to all of you guys, and I suggest please expand this network within the entire continent. Please do it to reach out to other youth in all 54 countries plus in Africa, and have a stronger coalition, because that's the way forward.
Thank you so much. So actually, I would like to say that Voice One Africa is a Pan-African organization. Yeah, and currently we are in 23 countries. So we are taking your advice. We'll keep extending our tentacles to reach all 55 countries.
Oh, well,
Thank you, Deborah.
so much. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for everything. And we'll be in contact.
Thank you, Deborah. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful morning.